Introduction. Had Rabelais never written his strange and marvelous romance, no one would ever have imagined the possibility of its production. It stands outside other things a mixture of mad mirth and gravity, of folly and reason, of childishness and grandeur, of the commonplace and the out-of-the-way, of popular verve and polished humanism, of mother-wit and learning, of baseness and nobility, of personalities and broad generalization, of the comic and the serious, of the impossible and the familiar. Throughout the whole there is such a force of life and thought, such a power of good sense, a kind of assurance so authoritative that he takes rank with the greatest, and his peers are not many. You may like him or not, may attack him or sing his praises, but you cannot ignore him. He is of those that die hard. Be as fastidious as you will, make up your mind to recognize only those who are, without any manner of doubt, beyond and above all others. However few the names you keep, Rabelais will always remain. We may know his work, may know it well, and admire it more every time we read it. After being amused by it, after having enjoyed it, we may return again to study it and to enter more fully into its meaning. Yet there is no possibility of knowing his own life in the same fashion. In spite of all the efforts, often successful, that have been made to throw light on it, to bring forward a fresh document or some obscure mention in a forgotten book, to add some little fact, to fix a date more precisely, it remains nevertheless full of uncertainty and of gaps. Besides, it has been burdened and sullied by all kinds of wearisome stories and foolish anecdotes, so that really there is more to weed out than to add. This injustice, at first willful, had its rise in the 16th century, in the furious attacks of a monk of Fontevrault, Gabriel de Peyherbolt, who seems to have drawn his conclusions concerning the author from the book, and more especially in the regrettable satirical epitaph of Ronsard, Piqued. It is said that the Guises had given him only a little pavilion in the forest of Meudon, whereas the presbytery was close to the chateau. From that time legend has fastened on Rabelais, has completely travestied him, till, bit by bit, it has made of him a buffoon, a veritable clown, a vagrant, a glutton, and a drunkard. The likeness of his person has undergone a similar metamorphosis. He has been credited with a full moon of a face, the rubicund nose of an incorrigible toper, and thick coarse lips always apart because always laughing. The picture would have surprised his friends no less than himself. There have been portraits painted of Rabelais, I have seen many such. They are all of the 17th century, and the greater number are conceived in this jovial and popular style. As a matter of fact, there is only one portrait of him that counts, that has more than the merest chance of being authentic, the one in the chronology Colli or Coupi. Under this double name is known, and cited a large sheet divided by lines and cross lines into little squares, containing about 100 heads of illustrious Frenchmen. This sheet was stuck on pasteboard for hanging on the wall, and was cut in little pieces, so that the portraits might be sold separately. The majority of the portraits are of known persons, and can therefore be verified. Now it can be seen that these have been selected with care, and taken from the most authentic sources, from statues, busts, medals, even stained glass, for the persons of most distinction, from earlier engravings for the others. Moreover, those of which no other copies exist, and which are therefore the most valuable, have each an individuality very distinct, in the features, the hair, the beard, as well as in the costume. Not one of them is like another. There has been no tampering with them, no forgery. On the contrary, there is in each a difference, a very marked personality. Leonard Gaultier, who published this engraving towards the end of the 16th century, reproduced a great many portraits besides from chalk drawings, in the style of his master, Thomas de Leeuw. It must have been such drawings that were the originals of those portraits which he alone has issued, and which may therefore be as authentic and reliable as the others whose correctness we are in a position to verify. Now Rabelais has here nothing of the Roger Bontemps of low degree about him. His features are strong, vigorously cut, and furrowed with deep wrinkles. His beard is short and scanty. His cheeks are thin and already worn-looking. On his head he wears the square cap of the doctors and the clerks, and his dominant expression, somewhat rigid and severe, is that of a physician and a scholar. And this is the only portrait to which we need attach any importance. This is not the place for a detailed biography, nor for an exhaustive study. At most, this introduction will serve as a framework on which to fix a few certain dates, to hang some general observations. The date of Rabelais' birth is very doubtful. For long, it was placed as far back as 1483. Now scholars are disposed to put it forward to about 1495. The reason, a good one, is that all those whom he has mentioned as his friends, or in any real sense his contemporaries, were born at the very end of the 15th century. And indeed, it is in the references in his romance to names, persons, and places that the most certain and valuable evidence is to be found of his intercourse, his patrons, his friendships, his sojournings, and his travels. His own work is the best and richest mine in which to search for the details of his life. Like Descartes and Balzac, he was a native of Touraine, and Tours and Chinon have only done their duty in each of them erecting in recent years a statue to his honor, a twofold homage reflecting credit both on the province and on the town. But the precise facts about his birth are nevertheless vague. Hewitt speaks of the village of Benise, near Bergeuil, of whose vineyards Rabelais makes mention. As the little vineyard of La Divinière, near Chinon, and familiar to all his readers, is supposed to have belonged to his father, Thomas Rabelais, some would have him born there. It is better to hold to the earlier general opinion that Chinon was his native town. Chinon, whose praises he sang with such heartiness and affection. There he might well have been born in the Lamprey house, which belonged to his father, who, to judge from this circumstance, must have been in easy circumstances, with the position of a well-to-do citizen. As La Lamprey in the 17th century was a hostelry, the father of Rabelais has been set down as an innkeeper. More probably, he was an apothecary, which would fit in with the medical profession adopted by his son in after years. Rabelais had brothers, all older than himself. Perhaps because he was the youngest, his father destined him for the church. The time he spent, while a child with the Benedictine monks at Sewell, is uncertain. There he might have made the acquaintance of the prototype of his Friar John, a brother of the name of Buonart, afterwards prior of Sermes. He was longer at the Abbey of the Cordeliers at La Baumette, half a mile from Angers, where he became a novice. As the brothers du Bellay, who were later his Mecenases, were then studying at the University of Angers, where it is certain he was not a student. It is doubtless from this youthful period that his acquaintance and alliance with them should date. Voluntarily, or induced by his family, Rabelais now embraced the ecclesiastical profession, and entered the monastery of the Franciscan Cordeliers at Fontenay-le-Comte, in Lower Poitou, which was honored by his long sojourn at the vital period of his life when his powers were ripening. There it was he began to study and to think, and there also began his troubles. In spite of the widespread ignorance among the monks of that age, the encyclopedic movement of the Renaissance was attracting all the lofty minds. Rabelais threw himself into it with enthusiasm, and Latin antiquity was not enough for him. Greek, a study discountenanced by the Church, which looked on it as dangerous and tending to free thought and heresy, took possession of him. To it he owed the warm friendship of Pierre Amy and of the celebrated Guillaume Bude. In fact, the Greek letters of the latter are the best source of information concerning this period of Rabelais' life. It was at Fontenay-le-Comte also that he became acquainted with the Brissons and the great jurist André Turrequot, whom he never mentions but with admiration and deep affection. Turrequot's treatise, De Legibus Connubialibus, published for the first time in 1513, has an important bearing on the life of Rabelais. There we learn that, dissatisfied with the incomplete translation of Herodotus by Laurent Valla, Rabelais had retranslated into Latin the first book of the history. That translation, unfortunately, is lost, as so many other of his scattered works. It is probably in this direction that the hazard of fortune has most discoveries and surprises in store for the lucky searcher. Moreover, as in this law treatise Turrequot attacked women in a merciless fashion, President Amaury Bouchard published in 1522 a book in their defense, and Rabelais, who was a friend of both the antagonists, took the side of Turrequot. It should be observed also in passing that there are several pages of such audacious plain speaking, that Rabelais, though he did not copy these in his Marriage of Panurge, has there been, in his own fashion, as outspoken as Turquo. If such freedom of language could be permitted in a grave treatise of law, similar liberties were certainly, in the same century, more natural in a book which was meant to amuse. The great reproach always brought against Rabelais is not the want of reserve of his language merely, but his occasional studied coarseness, which is enough to spoil his whole work, and which lowers its value. La Bruyere, in the chapter Des Ouvrages de l'Esprit, not in the first edition of the Characters, but in the fifth, that is to say in 1690, at the end of the great century, gives us on this subject his own opinion and that of his age. Marat and Rabelais are inexcusable in their habit of scattering filth about their writings. Both of them had genius enough and wit enough to do without any such expedient, even for the amusement of those persons who look more to the laugh to be got out of a book than to what is admirable in it. Rabelais especially is incomprehensible. His book is an enigma, one may say inexplicable. It is a chimera. It is like the face of a lovely woman with the feet and the tail of a reptile, or of some creature still more loathsome. It is a monstrous confusion of fine and rare morality with filthy corruption. Where it is bad, it goes beyond the worst. It is the delight of the basest of men. Where it is good, it reaches the exquisite, the very best. It ministers to the most delicate tastes. Putting aside the rather slight connection established between two men of whom one is of very little importance compared with the other. This is otherwise very admirably said, and the judgment is a very just one, except with regard to one point: the misunderstanding of the atmosphere in which the book was created, and the ignoring of the examples of a similar tendency furnished by literature as well as by the popular taste. Was it not the ancients that began it? Aristophanes, Catullus, Petronius, Martial flew in the face of decency in their ideas as well as in the words they used, and they dragged after them in this direction not a few of the Latin poets of the Renaissance, who believed themselves bound to imitate them. Is Italy without fault in this respect? Her storytellers in prose lie open to easy accusation. Her capitali in verse go to incredible lengths, and the astonishing success of Aretino must not be forgotten, nor the license of the whole Italian comic theatre of the 16th century. The Calandra of Bibbiena, who was afterwards a cardinal, and the Mandragola of Machiavelli are evidence enough, and these were played before popes, who were not a whit embarrassed. Even in England the drama went very far for a time, and the comic authors of the reign of Charles II, evidently from a reaction, and to shake off the excess and the wearisomeness of Puritan prudery and affectation, which sent them to the opposite extreme, are not exactly noted for their reserve. But we need not go beyond France. Slight indications, very easily verified, are all that may be set down here. A formal and detailed proof would be altogether too dangerous. Thus, for instance, the old fabliaux, the farces of the 15th century, the storytellers of the 16th reveal one of the sides, one of the veins, so to speak, of our literature. The art that addresses itself to the eye had likewise its share of this coarseness. Think of the sculptures on the capitals and the modillions of churches, and the crude frankness of certain painted windows of the 15th century. Queen Anne was, without any doubt, one of the most virtuous women in the world. Yet she used to go up the staircase of her chateau at Blois, and her eyes were not offended at seeing at the foot of a bracket a not very decent carving of a monk and a nun. Neither did she tear out of her book of hours the large miniature of the winter month, in which, careless of her neighbors' eyes, the mistress of the house, sitting before her great fireplace, warms herself in a fashion which it is not advisable that dames of our age should imitate. The statue of Cybele by the Tribolo, executed for Francis I, and placed, not against a wall, but in the middle of Queen Claude's chamber at Fontainebleau, has behind it an attribute which would have been more in place on a statue of Priapus, and which was the symbol of generativeness. The tone of the conversations was ordinarily of a surprising coarseness, and the Proceuses, in spite of their absurdities, did a very good work in setting themselves in opposition to it. The worthy Chevalier de la Tourlandry, in his instructions to his own daughters, without a thought of harm, gives examples which are singular indeed, and in Caxton's translation these are not omitted. The Adeveno Amaru, printed at Bruges by Collard Mansion, are astonishing indeed when one considers that they were the little society diversions of the duchesses of Burgundy and of the great ladies of a court more luxurious and more refined than the French court, which reveled in the cent nouvelles of good King Louis XI. Rabelais' pleasantry about the woman fall à la messe is exactly in the style of the Adeveno. A later work than any of his, the Novelle of Bandello, should be kept in mind, for the writer was Bishop of Agen, and his work was translated into French as also the Dames Galantes of Brantome. Read the journal of Heroard, that honest doctor, who day by day wrote down the details concerning the health of Louis XIII. From his birth, and you will understand the tone of the conversation of Henry IV. The jokes at a country wedding are trifles compared with this royal coarseness. Le Moyen de Parvenir is nothing but a tissue and a mass of filth, and the too celebrated cabinet satirique proves what, under Louis XIII, could be written, printed, and read. The collection of songs formed by Clairembalt shows that the 17th and 18th centuries were no purer than the 16th. Some of the most ribald songs are actually the work of princesses of the royal house. It is, therefore, altogether unjust to make Rabelais the scapegoat, to charge him alone with the sins of everybody else. He spoke as those of his time used to speak. When amusing them, he used their language to make himself understood, and to slip in his asides, which without this sauce would never have been accepted, would have found neither eyes nor ears. Let us blame not him, therefore, but the manners of his time. Besides, his gaiety, however coarse it may appear to us and how rare a thing is gaiety, has, after all, nothing unwholesome about it, and this is too often overlooked. Where does he tempt one astray from duty? Where, even indirectly, does he give pernicious advice? Whom has he led to evil ways? Does he ever inspire feelings that breed misconduct and vice, or is he ever the apologist of these? Many poets and romance writers, under cover of a fastidious style, without one coarse expression, have been really and actively hurtful, and of that it is impossible to accuse Rabelais. Women in particular quickly revolt from him, and turn away repulsed at once by the archaic form of the language and by the outspokenness of the words. But if he be read aloud to them, omitting the rougher parts and modernizing the pronunciation, it will be seen that they too are impressed by his lively wit as by the loftiness of his thought. It would be possible, too, to extract, for young persons, without modification, admirable passages of incomparable force. But those who have brought out expurgated editions of him, or who have thought to improve him by trying to rewrite him in modern French, have been fools for their pains, and their insulting attempts have had, and always will have, the success they deserve. His dedications prove to what extent his whole work was accepted. Not to speak of his epistolary relations with Bude, with the Cardinal d'Armagnac, and with Pelissier, the ambassador of Francis I, and Bishop of Maiglon, or of his dedication to Turquot of his Lyon edition of the Epistolae Medicinales of Giovanni Manardi of Ferrara. Of the one addressed to the President Amaury Bouchard of the two legal texts which he believed antique, there is still the evidence of his other and more important dedications. In 1532, he dedicated his Hippocrates and his Galen to Geoffrey d'Estasac, Bishop of Malazise, to whom in 1535 and 1536 he addressed from Rome the 3 news letters, which alone have been preserved. And in 1534, he dedicated from Lyon his edition of the Latin book of Marliani on the topography of Rome to Jean du Bellay, at that time Bishop of Paris, who was raised to the cardinalate in 1535. Beside these dedications, we must set the privilege of Francis I. of September 1545, and the new privilege granted by Henry II. On August 6, 1550, Cardinal de Chatelain present, for the third book, which was dedicated in an 8-line stanza to the spirit of the Queen of Navarre. These privileges, from the praises and eulogies they express in terms very personal and very exceptional, are as important in Rabelais' life as were, in connection with other matters, the apostolic pastorals in his favor. Of course, in these the popes had not to introduce his books of diversions, which, nevertheless, would have seemed in their eyes but very venial sins. The Siamachi of 1549, an account of the festivities arranged at Rome by Cardinal du Bellay in honor of the birth of the second son of Henry II, was addressed to Cardinal de Guise, and in 1552 the fourth book was dedicated, in a new prologue, to Cardinal de Chatelain, the brother of Admiral de Coligny. These are no unknown or insignificant personages, but the greatest lords and princes of the Church. They loved and admired and protected Rabelais and put no restrictions in his way. Why should we be more fastidious and severe than they were? Their high contemporary appreciation gives much food for thought. There are few translations of Rabelais in foreign tongues, and certainly the task is no light one and demands more than a familiarity with ordinary French. It would have been easier in Italy than anywhere else. Italian, from its flexibility and its analogy to French, would have lent itself admirably to the purpose. The instrument was ready, but the hand was not forthcoming. Neither is there any Spanish translation, a fact which can be more easily understood. The Inquisition would have been a far more serious opponent than the Paris, Sorbonne, and no one ventured on the experiment. Yet Rabelais forces comparison with Cervantes, whose precursor he was in reality, though the two books and the two minds are very different. They have only one point in common: their attack and ridicule of the romances of chivalry and of the wildly improbable adventures of knight-errants. But in Don Quixote, there is not a single detail which would suggest that Cervantes knew Rabelais' book or owed anything to it whatsoever, even the starting point of his subject. Perhaps it was better he should not have been influenced by him in however slight a degree. His originality is the more intact and the more genial. On the other hand, Rabelais has been several times translated into German. In the present century Regius published at Leipzig, from 1831 to 1841, with copious notes, a close and faithful translation. The first one cannot be so described, that of Johann Fischart, a native of Mainz or Strasbourg who died in 1614. He was a Protestant controversialist and a satirist of fantastic and abundant imagination. In 1575 appeared his translation of Rabelais' first book, and in 1590 he published the comic catalogue of the Library of St. Victor, borrowed from the second book. It is not a translation, but a recast in the boldest style, full of alterations and of exaggerations, both as regards the coarse expressions which he took upon himself to develop and to add to, and in the attacks on the Roman Catholic Church. According to Jean-Paul Richter, Fischart is much superior to Rabelais in style and in the fruitfulness of his ideas, and his equal in erudition and in the invention of new expressions after the manner of Aristophanes. He is sure that his work was successful because it was often reprinted during his lifetime, but this enthusiasm of Jean-Paul would hardly carry conviction in France. Who treads in another's footprints must follow in the rear. Instead of a creator, he is but an imitator. Those who take the ideas of others to modify them and make of them creations of their own, like Shakespeare in England, Molière and La Fontaine in France, may be superior to those who have served them with suggestions. But then the new works must be altogether different, must exist by themselves. Shakespeare and the others, when they imitated, may be said always to have destroyed their models. These copyists, if we call them so, created such works of genius that the only pity is they are so rare. This is not the case with Fischart, but it would be none the less curious were some one thoroughly familiar with German to translate Fischart for us, or at least, by long extracts from him, give an idea of the vagaries of German taste when it thought it could do better than Rabelais. It is dangerous to tamper with so great a work, and he who does so runs a great risk of burning his fingers. England has been less daring, and her modesty and discretion have brought her success. But before speaking of Urquhart's translation, it is but right to mention the English-French dictionary of Randall Cotgrave, the first edition of which dates from 1611. It is in every way exceedingly valuable, and superior to that of Nicot, because instead of keeping to the plane of classic and Latin French, it showed an acquaintance with and mastery of the popular tongue as well as of the written and learned language. As a foreigner, Cotgrave is a little behind in his information. He is not aware of all the changes and novelties of the passing fashion. The Pleiad school he evidently knew nothing of, but kept to the writers of the 15th and the first half of the 16th century. Thus words out of Rabelais, which he always translates with admirable skill, are frequent, and he attaches to them their author's name. So Rabelais had already crossed the channel and was read in his own tongue. Somewhat later, during the full sway of the Commonwealth and Mater Alcofribas Nacier, must have been a surprising apparition in the midst of Puritan severity. Captain Urquhart undertook to translate him and to naturalize him completely in England. Thomas Urquhart belonged to a very old family of good, standing in the north of Scotland. After studying in Aberdeen, he traveled in France, Spain, and Italy, where his sword was as active as that intelligent curiosity of his, which is evidenced by his familiarity with 3 languages, and the large library which he brought back, according to his own account, from 16 countries he had visited. On his return to England, he entered the service of Charles I, who knighted him in 1641. Next year, after the death of his father, he went to Scotland to set his family affairs in order, and to redeem his house in Cromarty. But in spite of another sojourn in foreign lands, his efforts to free himself from pecuniary embarrassments were unavailing. At the king's death, his Scottish loyalty caused him to side with those who opposed the Parliament. Formally proscribed in 1649, taken prisoner at the defeat of Worcester in 1651, stripped of all his belongings, he was brought to London, but was released on parole at Cromwell's recommendation. After receiving permission to spend 5 months in Scotland to try once more to settle his affairs, he came back to London to escape from his creditors. And there he must have died, though the date of his death is unknown. It probably took place after 1653, the date of the publication of the 2 first books, and after having written the translation of the 3rd, which was not printed from his manuscript till the end of the 17th century. His life was therefore not without its troubles, and literary activity must have been almost his only consolation. His writings reveal him as the strangest character, fantastic, and full of a naive vanity, which even at the time he was translating the genealogy of Gargantua, surely well calculated to cure any pondering on his own, caused him to trace his unbroken descent from Adam, and to state that his family name was derived from his ancestor Esarman, Prince of Achaia, 2139 B. 100, who was surnamed Aurichartos, that is to say, the fortunate and the well-beloved. A Gascon could not have surpassed this. Gifted as he was, learned in many directions, an enthusiastic mathematician, master of several languages, occasionally full of wit and humor, and even good sense, yet he gave his books the strangest titles, and his ideas were no less whimsical. His style is mystic, fastidious, and too often of a wearisome length and obscurity. His verses rhyme anyhow or not at all. But vivacity, force, and heat are never lacking, and the Maitland Club did well in reprinting, in 1834, his various works, which are very rare. Yet, in spite of their curious interest, he owes his real distinction and the survival of his name to his translation of Rabelais. The first 2 books appeared in 1653. The original edition, exceedingly scarce, was carefully reprinted in 1838, only 100 copies being issued, by an English bibliophile Theodora, 1000 Arton, whose interesting preface I regret to sum up so cursorily. At the end of the 17th century, in 1693, a French refugee, Peter Antony Mathieu, whose English verses and whose plays are not without value, published in a little octavo volume a reprint, very incorrect as to the text, of the first 2 books, to which he added the 3rd, from the manuscript found amongst Urquhart's papers. The success which attended this venture suggested to Mathieu the idea of completing the work, and a second edition, in 2 volumes, appeared in 1708, with the translation of the 4th and 5th books and notes. 19 years after his death, John Ozell, translator on a large scale of French, Italian, and Spanish authors, revised Mathieu's edition, which he published in 5 volumes in 1737, adding Le Duchat's notes, and this version has often been reprinted since. The continuation by Mathieu, who was also the translator of Don Quixote, has merits of its own. It is precise, elegant, and very faithful. Urquhart, without taking liberties with Rabelais like Fishart, is not always so closely literal and exact. Nevertheless, it is much superior to Mathieu's. If Urquhart does not constantly adhere to the form of the expression, If he makes a few slight additions, not only has he an understanding of the original, but he feels it, and renders the sense with a force and a vivacity full of warmth and brilliancy. His own learning made the comprehension of the work easy to him, and his anglicization of words fabricated by Rabelais is particularly successful. The necessity of keeping to his text prevented his indulgence in the convolutions and divagations dictated by his exuberant fancy when writing on his own account. His style, always full of life and vigor, is here balanced, lucid, and picturesque. Never elsewhere did he write so well. And thus the translation reproduces the very accent of the original, besides possessing a very remarkable character of its own. Such a literary tone and such literary qualities are rarely found in a translation. Urquhart's very useful for the interpretation of obscure passages, may, and indeed should be read as a whole, both for Rabelais and for its own merits. Holland, too, possesses a translation of Rabelais. They knew French in that country in the 17th century better than they do today, and their Rabelais works were reprinted when no editions were appearing in France. This Dutch translation was published at Amsterdam in 1682 by J. ten Hoorn. The name attached to it, Claudio Galatillo Claudius French-Italian, must certainly be a pseudonym. Only a Dutch scholar could identify the translator and state the value to be assigned to his work. Rabelais' style has many different sources. Besides its force and brilliancy, its gaiety, wit, and dignity, its abundant richness is no less remarkable. It would be impossible and useless to compile a glossary of Voltaire's words. No French writer has used so few, and all of them are of the simplest. There is not one of them that is not part of the common speech, or which demands a note or an explanation. Rabelais' vocabulary, on the other hand, is of an astonishing variety. Where does it all come from? As a fact, he had at his command something like 3 languages, which he used in turn, or which he mixed according to the effect he wished to produce. First of all, of course, he had ready to his hand the whole speech of his time, which had no secrets for him. Provincials have been too eager to appropriate him, to make of him a local author, the pride of some village, in order that their district might have the merit of being one of the causes, one of the factors of his genius. Every neighborhood where he ever lived has declared that his distinction was due to his knowledge of its popular speech. But these dialect patriots have fallen out among themselves. To which dialect was he indebted? Was it that of Touraine, or Berry, or Poitou, or Paris? It is too often forgotten, in regard to French patois leaving out of count, the languages of the South, that the words or expressions that are no longer in use today are but a survival, a still living trace of the tongue and the pronunciation of other days. Rabelais, more than any other writer, took advantage of the happy chances and the richness of the popular speech, but he wrote in French and nothing but French. That is why he remains so forcible, so lucid, and so living, more living even speaking only of his style out of charity to the others than any of his contemporaries. It has been said that great French prose is solely the work of the 17th century. There were nevertheless, before that, 2 men, certainly very different and even hostile, who were its initiators and its masters, Calvin on the one hand, on the other Rabelais. Rabelais had a wonderful knowledge of the prose and the verse of the 15th century. He was familiar with Villon, Pathelin, the Quinze Joies de Marriage, the Cent Nouvelles, the Chronicles, and the Romances, and even earlier works, too, such as the Roman de la Rose. Their words, their turns of expression came naturally to his pen, and added a piquancy, and, as it were, a kind of gloss of antique novelty to his work. He fabricated words, too, on Greek and Latin models, with great ease, sometimes audaciously and with needless frequency. These were for him so many means, so many elements of variety. Sometimes he did this in mockery, as in the humorous discourse of the Limousin scholar, for which he is not a little indebted to Geoffrey Torrey and the Champfleury. Sometimes, on the contrary, seriously, from a habit acquired in dealing with classical tongues. Again, another reason of the richness of his vocabulary was that he invented and forged words for himself. Following the example of Aristophanes, he coined an enormous number of interminable words, droll expressions, sudden and surprising constructions. What had made Greece and the Athenians laugh was worth transporting to Paris. With an instrument so rich, resources so endless, and the skill to use them, it is no wonder that he could give voice to anything. Be as humorous as he could be serious, as comic as he could be grave, that he could express himself and everybody else from the lowest to the highest. He had every color on his palette, and such skill was in his fingers that he could depict every variety of light and shade. We have evidence that Rabelais did not always write in the same fashion. The chronique Gargantuan is uniform in style and quite simple, but cannot with certainty be attributed to him. His letters are bombastic and thin, his few attempts at verse are heavy, lumbering, and obscure, altogether lacking in harmony, and quite as bad as those of his friend Jean Bouchet. He had no gift of poetic form, as indeed is evident even from his prose. And his letters from Rome to the Bishop of Mélizais, interesting as they are in regard to the matter, are as dull, bare, flat, and dry in style as possible. Without his signature, no one would possibly have thought of attributing them to him. He is only a literary artist when he wishes to be such, and in his romance, he changes the style completely every other moment. It has no constant character or uniform manner, and therefore unity is almost entirely wanting in his work, while his endeavors after contrast are unceasing. There is throughout the whole the evidence of careful and conscious elaboration. Hence, however lucid and free be the style of his romance, and though its flexibility and ease seem at first sight to have cost no trouble at all, yet its merit lies precisely in the fact that it succeeds in concealing the toil, in hiding the seams. He could not have reached this perfection at a first attempt. He must have worked long at the task, revised it again and again, corrected much, and added rather than cut away. The aptness of form and expression has been arrived at by deliberate means, and owes nothing to chance. Apart from the toning down of certain bold passages, to soften their effect, and appease the storm, for these were not literary alterations, but were imposed on him by prudence. One can see how numerous are the variations in his text, how necessary it is to take account of them, and to collect them. A good edition, of course, would make no attempt at amalgamating these. That would give a false impression and end in confusion, but it should note them all and show them all, not combined, but simply as variations. After Le Duchat, all the editions, in their care that nothing should be lost, made the mistake of collecting and placing side by side things which had no connection with each other, which had even been substituted for each other. The result was a fabricated text, full of contradictions naturally. But since the edition issued by 1000, Janet, the well-known publisher of the Bibliothèque Elzevirian, who was the first to get rid of this patchwork, this mosaic Rabelais latest text has been given, accompanied by all the earlier variations, to show the changes he made, as well as his suppressions and additions. It would also be possible to reverse the method. It would be interesting to take his first text as the basis, noting the later modifications. This would be quite as instructive and really worth doing. Perhaps one might then see more clearly with what care he made his revisions, after what fashion he corrected, and especially what were the additions he made. No more striking instance can be quoted than the admirable chapter about the shipwreck. It was not always so long as Rabelais made it in the end, it was much shorter at first. As a rule, when an author recasts some passage that he wishes to revise, he does so by rewriting the whole, or at least by interpolating passages at one stroke, so to speak. Nothing of the kind is seen here. Rabelais suppressed nothing, modified nothing, he did not change his plan at all. What he did was to make insertions, to slip in between two clauses a new one. He expressed his meaning in a lengthier way, and the former clause is found in its integrity along with the additional one, of which it forms, as it were, the warp. It was by this method of touching up the smallest details, by making here and there such little noticeable additions, that he succeeded in heightening the effect without either change or loss. In the end, it looks as if he had altered nothing, added nothing new, as if it had always been so from the first, and had never been meddled with. The comparison is most instructive, showing us to what an extent Rabelais' admirable style was due to conscious effort, care, and elaboration, a fact which is generally too much overlooked, and how instead of leaving any trace which would reveal toil and study, it has on the contrary a marvelous cohesion, precision, and brilliancy. It was modeled and remodeled, repaired, touched up, and yet it has all the appearance of having been created at a single stroke, or of having been run like molten wax into its final form. Something should be said here of the sources from which Rabelais borrowed. He was not the first in France to satirize the romances of chivalry. The romance in verse by Baudouin de Séberc, printed in recent years, was a parody of the chansons de geste. In the Monage Guillaume, and especially in the Monage Rainwat, in which there is a kind of giant, and occasionally a comic giant, there are situations and scenes which remind us of Rabelais. The kind of fabliaux in monorhyme quatrains of the old Aubery anticipate his coarse and popular jests. But all that is beside the question, Rabelais did not know these. Nothing is of direct interest save what was known to him, what fell under his eyes, what lay to his hand as the facetiae of Poggio and the last sermonaires. In the course of one's reading one may often enough come across the origin of some of Rabelais' witticisms. Here and there we may discover how he has developed a situation. While gathering his materials wherever he could find them, he was nevertheless profoundly original. On this point, much research and investigation might be employed. But there is no need why these researches should be extended to the region of fancy. Gargantua has been proved by some to be of Celtic origin. Very often he is a solar myth, and the statement that Rabelais only collected popular traditions and gave new life to ancient legends is said to be proved by the large number of megalithic monuments to which is attached the name of Gargantua. It was, of course, quite right to make a list of these, to draw up, as it were, a chart of them, but the conclusion is not justified. The name, instead of being earlier, is really later, and is a witness not to the origin, but to the success and rapid popularity of his novel. No one has ever yet produced a written passage, or any ancient testimony, to prove the existence of the name before Rabelais. To place such a tradition on a sure basis, positive traces must be forthcoming, and they cannot be adduced even for the most celebrated of these monuments, since he mentions himself the great menhir near Poitiers, which he christened by the name of Passalerdin. That there is something in the theory is possible. Perrault found the subjects of his stories in the tales told by mothers and nurses. He fixed them finally by writing them down. Floating about vaguely as they were, he seized them, worked them up, gave them shape, and yet of scarcely any of them is there to be found before his time a single trace. So we must resign ourselves to know just as little of what Gargantua and Pantagruel were before the 16th century. In a book of a contemporary of Rabelais, the legend de Pierre, Feyfu by the Angevin, Charles de Burdine, the first edition of which dates from 1526, and the second 1531, both so rare and so forgotten that the work is only known since the 18th century, by the reprint of Custelier the introductory ballad, which recommends this book to readers. Occur these lines in the list of popular books which Feyfu would desire to replace. Laces Esther, Calet le Falester, les quater fils Imen vestas de blue Gargantua qui a cheveu de plaster. He has not cheveu de plaster in Rabelais. If the rhyme had not suggested the phrase end, the exigencies of the strict form of the ballad, and its forced repetitions often imposed an idea which had its whole origin in the rhyme, we might here see a dramatic trace found nowhere else. The name of Pantagruel is mentioned too, incidentally, in a mystery of the 15th century. These are the only references to the names which up till now have been discovered, and they are, as one sees, of but little account. On the other hand, the influence of Aristophanes and of Lucian, his intimate acquaintance with nearly all the writers of antiquity, Greek as well as Latin, with whom Rabelais is more permeated even than Montaigne, were a mine of inspiration. The proof of it is everywhere. Pliny especially was his encyclopedia, his constant companion. All he says of the Pantagruelian herb, though he amply developed it for himself, is taken from Pliny's chapter on flax. And there is a great deal more of this kind to be discovered, for Rabelais does not always give it as quotation. On the other hand, when he writes, such an one says, it would be difficult enough to find who is meant, for the such an one is a fictitious writer. The method is amusing, but it is curious to account of it. The question of the chronique gargantuan is still undecided. Is it by Rabelais or by someone else? Both theories are defensible and can be supported by good reasons. In the chronique, everything is heavy, occasionally meaningless, and nearly always insipid. Can the same man have written the Chronique and Gargantua, replaced a book really commonplace by a masterpiece, changed the facts and incidents, transformed a heavy icy pleasantry into a work glowing with wit and life, made it no longer a mass of laborious trifling and cold-blooded exaggerations, but a satire on human life of the highest genius? Still, there are points common to the two. Besides, Rabelais wrote other things, and it is only in his romance that he shows literary skill. The conception of it would have entered his mind first only in a bare and summary fashion. It would have been taken up again, expanded, developed, metamorphosed. That is possible, and, for my part, I am of those who, like Brunnet and Nodier, are inclined to think that the Chronique, in spite of its inferiority, is really a first attempt, condemned as soon as the idea was conceived in another form. As its earlier date is incontestable, we must conclude that if the Chronique is not by him, his Gargantua and its continuation would not have existed without it. This would be a great obligation to stand under to some unknown author, and in that case, it is astonishing that his enemies did not reproach him during his lifetime with being merely an imitator and a plagiarist. So there are reasons for and against his authorship of it, and it would be dangerous to make too bold an assertion. One fact which is absolutely certain and beyond all controversy is that Rabelais owed much to one of his contemporaries, an Italian, to the Histoire Macaronique of Merlin Coccia. Its author, Theophilus Folengo, who was also a monk, was born in 1491 and died only a short time before Rabelais in 1544. But his burlesque poem was published in 1517. It was in Latin verse, written in an elaborately fabricated style. It is not dog Latin, but Latin ingeniously Italianized, or rather Italian, even Mantuan, Latinized. The contrast between the modern form of the word and its Roman garb produces the most amusing effect. In the original, it is sometimes difficult to read, for Folengo has no objection to using the most colloquial words and phrases. The subject is quite different. It is the adventures of Baldo, son of Guy de Montauban, the very lively history of his youth, his trial, imprisonment, and deliverance, his journey in search of his father, during which he visits the planets and hell. The narration is constantly interrupted by incidental adventures. Occasionally, they are what would be called today very naturalistic, and sometimes they are madly extravagant. But Fracasso, Baldo's friend, is a giant. Another friend, Singer, who delivers him, is Panurge exactly, and quite as much given to practical joking. The women in the senile amour of the old Tignazzo, the judges, and the poor sergeants, are no more gently dealt with by Folengo than by the monk of the Isles de Hyères. If Dinanot's name does not occur, there are the sheep. The Tempest is there, and the invocation to all the saints. Rabelais improves all he borrows, but it is from Folengo he starts. He does not reproduce the words, but like the Italian, he revels in drinking scenes, junketings, gormandizing, battles, scuffles, wounds and corpses, magic, witches, speeches, repeated enumerations, lengthiness, and a solemnly minute precision of impossible dates and numbers. The atmosphere, the tone, the methods are the same, and to know Rabelais well, you must know Folengo well too. Detailed proof of this would be too lengthy a matter. One would have to quote too many passages, but on this question of sources, nothing is more interesting than a perusal of the Opus Macaronicorum. It was translated into French only in 1606 Paris, Gilles Robinot. This translation, of course, cannot reproduce all the many amusing forms of words, but it is useful, nevertheless, in showing more clearly the points of resemblance between the two works, how far in form, ideas, details, and phrases Rabelais was permeated by Folengo. The anonymous translator saw this quite well and said so in his title, Histoire Macaronique de Merlin Coccia, prototype of Rabelais. It is nothing but the truth, and Rabelais, who does not hide it from himself, on more than one occasion mentions the name of Merlin Coccia. Besides, Rabelais was fed on the Italians of his time, as on the Greeks and Romans. Panurge, who owes much to Singer, is also not free from obligations to the miscreant Margot in the Morgante Magyar of Pulci. Had Rabelais in his mind the tale from the Florentine chronicles, how in the Savonarola riots, when the Piagnoni and the Arrabbiati came to blows in the church of the Dominican convent of San Marco, Fra Pietro in the scuffle broke the heads of the assailants with the bronze crucifix he had taken from the altar. A well-handled cross could so readily be used as a weapon that probably it has served as such more than once, and other and even quite modern instances might be quoted. But other Italian sources are absolutely certain. There are few more wonderful chapters in Rabelais than the one about the drinkers. It is not a dialogue. Those short exclamations exploding from every side, all referring to the same thing, never repeating themselves, and yet always varying the same theme. At the end of the novelle of Gentile Sermini of Siena, there is a chapter called Il Giuoco della Pugna, the game of battle. Here are the first lines of it: Apre, apre, apre. Kai gioca a pariani viella, date ognuno, elementella olter di corsa, non Roman 6 fermate voltate quieco costoro, fate veli in nanzi, viella, date costi, kai la fa. Io ed io dagli, buona fu cosi, alla mescella al fianco. Dagli basso, di punta, a buon gioco. And thus it goes on with fire and animation for pages. Rabelais probably translated or directly imitated it. He changed the scene. There was no Giuoco della Pugna in France. He transferred to a drinking bout this clatter of exclamations which go off by themselves, which cross each other and get no answer. He made a wonderful thing of it. But though he did not copy Sermini, yet Sermini's work provided him with the form of the subject, and was the theme for Rabelais' marvelous variations. Who does not remember the fantastic quarrel of the cook with the poor devil who had flavored his dry bread with the smoke of the roast, and the judgment of Saint John, truly worthy of Solomon? It comes from the Cento Novelle Antici, rewritten from tales older than Boccaccio, and moreover of an extreme brevity and dryness. They are only the framework, the notes, the skeleton of tales. The subject is often wonderful, but nothing is made of it. It is left unshaped. Rabelais wrote a version of one, the 9th. The scene takes place, not at Paris, but at Alexandria in Egypt among the Saracens, and the cook is called Fabrac. But the surprise at the end, the sagacious judgment by which the sound of a piece of money was made the price of the smoke, is the same. Now the first dated edition of the Cento Novelle, which were frequently reprinted, appeared at Bologna in 1525, and it is certain that Rabelais had read the tales. And there would be much else of the same kind to learn if we knew Rabelais' library. A still stranger fact of this sort may be given to show how nothing came amiss to him. He must have known, and even copied the Latin chronicle of the Counts of Anjou. It is accepted, and rightly so, as an historical document, but that is no reason for thinking that the truth may not have been manipulated and adorned. The Counts of Anjou were not saints. They were proud, quarrelsome, violent, rapacious, and extravagant, as greedy as they were charitable to the church, treacherous and cruel. Yet their anonymous panegyrist has made them patterns of all the virtues. In reality, it is both a history and, in some sort, a romance. Especially is it a collection of examples worthy of being followed, in the style of the Cyropaedia, our Juvenal of the 15th century, and a little like Fenelon's Telemaque. Now in it there occurs the address of one of the counts to those who rebelled against him and who were at his mercy. Rabelais must have known it, for he has copied it, or rather, literally translated whole lines of it in the wonderful speech of Gargantua to the vanquished. His contemporaries, who approved of his borrowing from antiquity, could not detect this one, because the book was not printed till much later. But Rabelais lived in Maine. In Anjou, which often figures among the localities he names, he must have met with and read the chronicles of the counts in manuscript, probably in some monastery library, whether at Fontenay-le-Comte or elsewhere, it matters little. There is not only a likeness in the ideas and tone, but in the words too, which cannot be a mere matter of chance. He must have known the chronicles of the Counts of Anjou, and they inspired one of his finest pages. One sees, therefore, how varied were the sources whence he drew, and how many of them must probably always escape us. When, as has been done for Molière, a critical bibliography of the works relating to Rabelais is drawn up which, by the by, will entail a very great amount of labor, the easiest part will certainly be the bibliography of the old editions. That is the section that has been most satisfactorily and most completely worked out. 1000. Brunet said the last word on the subject in his researches in 1852 and in the important article in the 5th edition of his Manuel du Libraire, Roman 4. 1863, pp. 1037-1071. The facts about the 5th book cannot be summed up briefly. It was printed as a whole at first, without the name of the place, in 1564, and next year at Lyon by Jean Martin. It has given, and even still gives rise to two contradictory opinions. Is it Rabelais or not? First of all, if he had left it complete, would 16 years have gone by before it was printed? Then, does it bear evident marks of his workmanship? Is the hand of the master visible throughout? Anton du Verdier in the 1605 edition of his prosopography writes, Rabelais, misfortune has been that everybody has wished to Pantagruelize, and several books have appeared under his name and have been added to his works, which are not by him, as, for instance, L'Ile Sonante, written by a certain scholar of Valence and others. The scholar of Valence might be Guillaume des Autels, to whom with more certainty can be ascribed the authorship of a dull imitation of Rabelais, the history of Fanfreluche and Godichin, published in 1578, which, to say the least of it, is very much inferior to the 5th book. Louis Guyon, in his Diverses Lekens, is still more positive. As to the last book which has been included in his works, entitled L'Ile Sonante, the object of which seems to be to find fault with and laugh at the members and the authorities of the Catholic Church, I protest that he did not compose it, for it was written long after his death. I was at Paris when it was written, and I know quite well who was its author. He was not a doctor. That is very emphatic, and it is impossible to ignore it. Yet everyone must recognize that there is a great deal of Rabelais in the 5th book. He must have planned it and begun it. Remembering that in 1548 he had published, not as an experiment, but rather as a bait and as an announcement, the first 11 chapters of the 4th book, we may conclude that the first 16 chapters of the 5th book, published by themselves 9 years after his death, in 1562, represent the remainder of his definitely finished work. This is the more certain because these first chapters, which contain the apologue of the horse and the ass and the terrible ferdlocats, are markedly better than what follows them. They are not the only ones where the master's hand may be traced, but they are the only ones where no other hand could possibly have interfered. In the remainder, the sentiment is distinctly Protestant. Rabelais was much struck by the vices of the clergy and did not spare them. Whether we are unable to forgive his criticisms because they were conceived in a spirit of raillery, or whether, on the other hand, we feel admiration for him on this point, yet Rabelais was not in the least a sectary. If he strongly desired a moral reform, indirectly pointing out the need of it in his mocking fashion, he was not favorable to a political reform. Those who would make of him a Protestant altogether forget that the Protestants of his time were not for him, but against him. Henry Estienne, for instance, Ramus, Theodore de Beze, and especially Calvin, should know how he was to be regarded. Rabelais belonged to what may be called the early Reformation, to that band of honest men in the beginning of the 16th century, precursors of the later one perhaps, but like Erasmus, between the two extremes. He was neither Lutheran nor Calvinist, neither German nor Genevese, and it is quite natural that his work was not reprinted in Switzerland, which would certainly have happened had the Protestants looked on him as one of themselves. That Rabelais collected the materials for the 5th book, had begun it, and got on some way, there can be no doubt. The excellence of a large number of passages prove it, but taken as a whole the 5th book has not the value, the verve, and the variety of the others. The style is quite different, less rich, briefer, less elaborate, drier, in parts even wearisome. In the first 4 books, Rabelais seldom repeats himself. The fifth book contains, from the point of view of the vocabulary, really the least novelty. On the contrary, it is full of words and expressions already met with, which is very natural in an imitation, in a copy, forced to keep to a similar tone, and to show by such reminders and likenesses that it is really by the same pen. A very striking point is the profound difference in the use of anatomical terms. In the other books, they are most frequently used in a humorous sense, and nonsensically, with a quite other meaning than their own. In the fifth, they are applied correctly. It was necessary to include such terms to keep up the practice, but the writer has not thought of using them to add to the comic effect. One cannot always think of everything. Trouble has been taken, of course, to include enumerations, but there are much fewer fabricated and fantastic words. In short, the hand of the maker is far from showing the same suppleness and strength. A eulogistic quatrain is signed Nature Quite, which, it is generally agreed, is an anagram of Jean Turquet. Did the adapter of the fifth book sign his work in this indirect fashion? He might be of the Genovese family to whom Louis Turquet and his son Theodore belonged, both well known and both strong Protestants. The obscurity relating to this matter is far from being cleared up, and perhaps never will be. It fell to my lot here, unfortunately, I am forced to speak of a personal matter to print, for the first time the manuscript of the fifth book. At first it was hoped it might be in Rabelais' own hand, afterwards that it might be at least a copy of his unfinished work. The task was a difficult one, for the writing, extremely flowing and rapid, is execrable and most difficult to decipher and to transcribe accurately. Besides, it often happens in the 16th and the end of the 15th century that manuscripts are much less correct than the printed versions, even when they have not been copied by clumsy and ignorant hands. In this case, it is the writing of a clerk executed as quickly as possible. The farther it goes, the more incorrect it becomes, as if the writer were in haste to finish. What is really the origin of it? It has less the appearance of notes or fragments prepared by Rabelais than of a first attempt at revision. It is not an author's rough draft, still less is it his manuscript. If I had not printed this enigmatical text with scrupulous and painful fidelity, I would do it now. It was necessary to do it so as to clear the way. But as the thing is done, and accessible to those who may be interested, and who wish to critically examine it, there is no further need of reprinting it. All the editions of Rabelais continue, and rightly, to reproduce the edition of 1564. It is not the real Rabelais, but however open to criticism it may be, it was under that form that the fifth book appeared in the 16th century. Under that form it was accepted. Consequently, it is convenient and even necessary to follow and keep to the original edition. The first 16 chapters may, and really must be, the text of Rabelais, in the final form as left by him and found after his death. The framework, and a number of the passages in the continuation, the best ones, of course, are his, but have been patched up and tampered with. Nothing can have been suppressed of what existed. It was evidently thought that everything should be admitted with the final revision, but the tone was changed, additions were made, and improvements. Adapters are always strangely vain. In the 17th century, the French printing press, save for an edition issued at Troyes in 1613, gave up publishing Rabelais, and the work passed to foreign countries. Jean Feuet reprinted him at Antwerp in 1602. After the Amsterdam edition of 1659, where for the first time appears the alphabet of the French author, comes the Elsevier edition of 1663. The type, an imitation of what made the reputation of the little volumes of the Griffs of Lyon, is charming, the printing is perfect, and the paper, which is French the development of paper-making in Holland and England, did not take place till after the revocation of the Edict of Nantes is excellent. They are pretty volumes to the eye, but, as in all the reprints of the 17th century, the text is full of faults and most untrustworthy. France, through a representative in a foreign land, however, comes into line again in the beginning of the 18th century, and in a really serious fashion, thanks to the very considerable learning of a French refugee, Jacob Le Duchet, who died in 1748. He had a most thorough knowledge of the French prose writers of the 16th century, and he made them accessible by his editions of the Quin's Joys du Marriage, of Henry Estienne, of Agrippa d'Aubigné, of 50 Edel, and of the Satire Menopee. In 1711, he published an edition of Rabelais at Amsterdam, through Henry Bordesius, in 5 duodecimo volumes. The reprint in quarto, which he issued in 1741, 7 years before his death, is, with its engravings by Bernard Picot, a fine library edition. Le Duchatz is the first of the critical editions. It takes account of differences in the texts and begins to point out the variations. His very numerous notes are remarkable and are still worthy of most serious consideration. He was the first to offer useful elucidations, and these have been repeated after him, and with good reason will continue to be so. The Abbé de Massey's edition of 1752, also an Amsterdam production, has made use of Le Duchatz, but does not take its place. Finally, at the end of the century, Cazin printed Rabelais in his little volume, in 1782, and Bardiers issued 2 editions, of no importance, at Paris in 1782 and 1798. Fortunately, the 19th century has occupied itself with the great satirique in a more competent and useful fashion. In 1820-50, Aulnay published through Desauer his 3 little volumes, printed in exquisite style, and which have other merits besides. His volume of annotations, in which, that nothing might be lost of his own notes, he has included many things not directly relating to Rabelais, is full of observations and curious remarks which are very useful additions to Le Duchatz. One fault to be found with him is his further complication of the spelling. This he did in accordance with a principle that the words should be referred to their real etymology. Learned though he was, Rabelais had little care to be so etymological, and it is not his theories, but those of the modern scholar that have been ventilated. Somewhat later, from 1823 to 1826, Esmengart and Johannot issued a Verurum edition in 9 volumes, in which the text is often encumbered by notes which are really too numerous, and, above all, too long. The work was an enormous one, but the best part of it is Le Duchatz, and what is not his is too often absolutely hypothetical and beside the truth. Le Duchatz had already given too much importance to the false historical explanation. Here it is constantly coming in, and it rests on no evidence. In reality, there is no need of the key to Rabelais by which to discover the meaning of subtle allusions. He is neither so complicated nor so full of riddles. We know how he has scattered the names of contemporaries about his work, sometimes of friends, sometimes of enemies, and without disguising them under any mask. He is no more Panurge than Louis XII. Is Gargantua or Francis I. Pantagruel. Rabelais says what he wants, all he wants, and in the way he wants. There are no mysteries below the surface, and it is a waste of time to look for knots in a bulrush. All the historical explanations are purely imaginary, utterly without proof, and should the more emphatically be looked on as baseless and dismissed. They are radically false, and therefore both worthless and harmful. In 1840, there appeared in the Bibliothèque Charpentier the Rabelais in a single duodecimo volume, begun by Charles Labich, and, after his death, completed by 1000. Paul Lacroix, whose share is the larger. The text is that of 50 Aulnay. The short footnotes, with all their brevity, contain useful explanations of difficult words. Amongst the editions of Rabelais, this is one of the most important, because it brought him many readers and admirers. No other has made him so well and so widely known as this portable volume, which has been constantly reprinted. No other has been so widely circulated, and the sale still goes on. It was, and must still be looked on as a most serviceable edition. The edition published by Didot in 1857 has an altogether special character. In the biographical notice 1000, Rathery for the first time treated as they deserve the foolish prejudices which have made Rabelais misunderstood, and 1000. Burgaud Desmerits set the text on a quite new base. Having proved, what of course is very evident, that in the original editions the spelling, and the language too, were of the simplest and clearest, and were not bristling with the nonsensical and superfluous consonants which have given rise to the idea that Rabelais is difficult to read. He took the trouble first of all to note the spelling of each word. Whenever in a single instance he found it in accordance with modern spelling, he made it the same throughout. The task was a hard one, and Rabelais certainly gained in clearness, but overzeal is often fatal to a reform. In respect to its precision and the value of its notes, which are short and very judicious, Burgade des Merits edition is valuable, and is amongst those which should be known and taken into account. Since Le Duchet, all the editions have a common fault. They are not exactly guilty of fabricating, but they set up an artificial text in the sense that, in order to lose as little as possible, they have collected and united what originally were variations, the revisions, in short, of the original editions. Guided by the wise counsels given by Brunnet in 1852 in his researches on the old editions of Rabelais, Peer Janet published the first 3 books in 1858. Then, when the publication of the Bibliothèque Elzevirienne was discontinued, he took up the work again and finished the edition in Picard's Blue Library, in little volumes, each book quite distinct. It was 1,000. Janet, who in our days first restored the pure and exact text of Rabelais, not only without retouching it, but without making additions or insertions or juxtaposition of things that were not formerly found together. For each of the books he has followed the last edition issued by Rabelais, and all the earlier differences he gives as variations. It is astonishing that a thing so simple and so fitting should not have been done before, and the result is that this absolutely exact fidelity has restored a lucidity which was not wanting in Rabelais's time, but which had since been obscured. All who have come after Janet have followed in his path, and there is no reason for straying from it. Francis Rabelais. The first book. To the honored, noble translator of Rabelais. Rabelais, whose wit prodigiously was made, all men, professions, actions to invade, with so much furious vigor, as if it had lived o'er each of them, and each had quit, yet with such happy sleight and careless skill, as like the serpent doth with laughter kill, so that although his noble leaves appear antic and godish, and dull souls forbear to turn them o'er, lest they should only find nothing but savage monsters of a mind, no shapen beauteous thoughts. Yet when the wise seriously strip him of his wild disguise, melt down his dross, refine his massy ore, and polish that which seemed rough cast before, search his deep sense, unveil his hidden mirth, and make that fiery which before seemed earth, conquering those things of highest consequence, what's difficult of language or of sense, he will appear some noble table writ in the old Egyptian hieroglyphic wit, where, though you monsters and grotzkos see, you meet all mysteries of philosophy. For he was wise and sovereignly bred to know what mankind is, how he may be led. He stooped unto them, like that wise man who rid on a stick, whence children would do so. For we are easy sullen things, and must be laughed aright and cheated into trust, whilst a black piece of phlegm, that lays about dull menaces and terrifies the rout, and cajoles it, with all its peevish strength piteously stretched and botched up into length, whilst the tired rabble sleepily obey such opiate talk, and snore away the day, by all his noise as much their minds relieves, as caterwauling of wild cats frights thieves. But Rabelais was another thing. A man made up of all that art and nature can form from a fiery genius. He was one whose soul so universally was thrown through all the arts of life, who understood each stratagem by which we stray from good, so that he best might solid virtue teach, as some gainst sins of their own bosoms preach. He from wise choice did the true means prefer, in the fool's coat acting philosopher. Thus hoary Aesop's beasts did mildly tame fierce man, and moralize him into shame, thus brave romances, while they seem to lay great trains of lust, platonic love display. Thus would old Sparta, if a seldom chance showed a drunk slave, teach children temperance. Thus did the later poets nobly bring the scene to height, making the fool the king. And noble sir, you vigorously have trod in this hard path, unknown, ununderstood by its own countrymen. Tease you appear our full enjoyment which was our despair, scattering his mists, cheering his cynic frowns, for radiant brightness now dark Rabelais crowns, leaving your brave heroic cares, which must make better mankind and embalm your dust, so undeceiving us that now we see all wit in Gascon and in Cromarty, besides that Rabelais is conveyed to us, and that our Scotland is not barbarous. J. de la Salle. Rablophila. The first decade. The commendation. Musa. canas nostrorum in testimonium amorum, et gargantuas perpetuato faces, ut camini tali resultet nobilis echo, quicquid fama canet, Pantagruelis erit. The argument. Here I intend mysteriously to sing, with a pen plucked from fame's own wing, of Gargantua that learned breech-wiping king. Decade the first. Aye, help me, propitious stars, a mighty blaze benumbs me. I must sound the praise of him hath this crabbed work in such heroic phrase. 2. What wit would not court martyrdom to hold upon his head a laurel of gold, where for each rich conceit a Pumpian pearl is told. 3. And such a one as this, art's masterpiece, a thing ne'er equaled by old Greece, a thing ne'er matched as yet, a real golden fleece. 4. Vice is a soldier fights against mankind, which you may look but never find, for 'tis an envious thing, with cunning interlined. 5. And thus he rails at drinking all before and for lewd women does behore and brings their painted faces and black patches to quorum. 6. To drink he was a furious enemy contented with a sixpenny, with diamond hatband, silver spurs, 6 horses. Pi. 7. And for tobacco's patrotunding smoke, much had he said, and much more spoke, but 'twas not then found out, so the design was broke. 8. Muse. Fancy. Faith. Come now arise aloud, assembled in a blue-veined cloud, and this tall infant in angelic arms now shroud. 9. To praise it further I would now begin were now a thoroughfare and in it harbors vice, though be to catch it in a gin. 10. Therefore, my muse, draw up thy flowing sail, and acclamate a gentle hail with all thy art and metaphors, which must prevail. Jam prima oceani pars, est praeter rita nostri. Imperibus restat, danda secunda modis. Quam si prestiterit mentem demon malus adam, cum sapiens totus proderit Rabelais. Malevolis. Reader, the errata, which in this book are not a few, are casually lost, and therefore the translator, not having leisure to collect them again, craves thy pardon for such as thou mayst meet with. The author's prologue to the first book. Most noble and illustrious drinkers, and you thrice precious pockified blades, for to you, and none else do I dedicate my writings, Alcibiades, in that dialogue of Plato's, which is entitled The Banquet, whilst he was setting forth the praises of his schoolmaster Socrates, without all question the prince of philosophers, amongst other discourses to that purpose, said that he resembled the Silines. Silines of old were little boxes, like those we now may see in the shops of apothecaries, painted on the outside with wanton toyish figures, as harpies, satyrs, bridled geese, horned hares, saddled ducks, flying goats, tiller hearts, and other such-like counterfeited pictures at discretion, to excite people unto laughter, as Silenus himself, who was the foster-father of good Bacchus, was wont to do. But within those capricious caskets were carefully preserved and kept many rich jewels and fine drugs, such as balm, ambergris, amomon, musk, civet, with several kinds of precious stones and other things of great price. Just such another thing was Socrates. For to have eyed his outside, and esteemed of him by his exterior appearance, you would not have given the peel of an onion for him, so deformed he was in body and ridiculous in his gesture. He had a sharp-pointed nose, with the look of a bull and countenance of a fool. He was in his carriage simple, boorish in his apparel, in fortune poor, unhappy in his wives, unfit for all offices in the commonwealth, always laughing, tippling, and merrily carousing to everyone, with continual jibes and jeers, the better by those means to conceal his divine knowledge. Now, opening this box, you would have found within it a heavenly and inestimable drug, a more than human understanding, an admirable virtue, matchless learning, invincible courage, unimitable sobriety, certain contentment of mind, perfect assurance, and an incredible misregard of all that for which men commonly do so much watch, run, sail, fight, travel, toil, and turmoil themselves. Whereunto, in your opinion, doth this little flourish of a preamble tend? For so much as you, my good disciples, and some other jolly fools of ease and leisure, reading the pleasant titles of some books of our invention, as Gargantua, Pantagruel, Whippot Fecipent, the dignity of codpieces, of peas and bacon with a commentary, and see, are too ready to judge that there is nothing in them but jests, mockeries, lascivious discourse, and recreative lies. Because the outside, which is the title, is usually, without any farther inquiry, entertained with scoffing and derision. But truly it is very unbeseeming to make so slight account of the works of men, seeing yourselves avouch that it is not the habit makes the monk, many being monasterially accoutred, who inwardly are nothing less than monachal, and that there are of those that wear Spanish capes, who have but little of the valor of Spaniards in them. Therefore is it that you must open the book, and seriously consider of the matter treated in it. Then shall you find that it containeth things of far higher value than the box did promise. That is to say, that the subject thereof is not so foolish as by the title at the first sight it would appear to be. And put the case, that in the literal sense you meet with purposes merry and salacious enough, and consequently very correspondent to their inscriptions, yet must not you stop there as at the melody of the charming sirens, but endeavor to interpret that in a sublimer sense which possibly you intended to have spoken in the jollity of your heart. Did you ever pick the lock of a cupboard to steal a bottle of wine out of it? Tell me truly, and, if you did, call to mind the countenance which then you had. Or, did you ever see a dog with a marrow-bone in his mouth the beast of all other, says Plato, lib. 2 de Republica, the most philosophical. If you have seen him, you might have remarked with what devotion and circumspectness he wards and watcheth it, with what care he keeps it, how fervently he holds it, how prudently he gobbets it, with what affection he breaks it, and with what diligence he sucks it. To what end all this? What moveth him to take all these pains? What are the hopes of his labor? What doth he expect to reap thereby? Nothing but a little marrow. True it is, that this little is more savory and delicious than the great quantities of other sorts of meat, because the marrow, as Galen testifieth 5. Vacult, Nat, and 11, de usupartium, is a nourishment most perfectly elabored by nature. In imitation of this dog, it becomes you to be wise, to smell, feel, and have in estimation these fair goodly books, stuffed with high conceptions, which, though seemingly easy in the pursuit, are in the cope and encounter somewhat difficult. And then, like him, you must, by a sedulous lecture, and frequent meditation, break the bone, and suck out the marrow that is, my allegorical sense, or the things I to myself propose to be signified by these Pythagorical symbols, with assured hope, that in so doing you will at last attain to be both well-advised and valiant by the reading of them. For in the perusal of this treatise you shall find another kind of taste, and a doctrine of a more profound and abstruse consideration, which will disclose unto you the most glorious sacraments and dreadful mysteries, as well in what concerneth your religion, as matters of the public state, and life economical. Do you believe, upon your conscience, that Homer, whilst he was couching his Iliads and Odysseys, had any thought upon those allegories, which Plutarch, Heraclides Ponticus, Eustathius Cornutus squeezed out of him, and which Politian filched again from them? If you trust it, with neither hand nor foot do you come near to my opinion, which judgeth them to have been as little dreamed of by Homer, as the gospel sacraments were by Ovid in his Metamorphoses, though a certain gullygut friar, Freer Lubin Croquelarden. And true bacon-picker would have undertaken to prove it, if perhaps he had met with as very fools as himself, and as the proverb says, a lid worthy of such a kettle. If you give no credit thereto, why do not you the same in these jovial new chronicles of mine? Albeit, when I did dictate them, I thought upon no more than you, who possibly were drinking the whilst as I was. For in the composing of this lordly book, I never lost nor bestowed any more, nor any other time than what was appointed to serve me for taking of my bodily refection, that is, whilst I was eating and drinking. And indeed that is the fittest and most proper hour wherein to write these high matters and deep sciences. As Homer knew very well, the paragon of all philologues, and Aeneas, the father of the Latin poets, as Horace calls him, although a certain sneaking Jobernal alleged that his verses smelled more of the wine than oil. So saith a turlupin or a new start-up grub of my books, but a turd for him. The fragrant odor of the wine, oh how much more dainty, pleasant, laughing, riant, priant, friant, celestial and delicious it is than that smell of oil. And I will glory as much when it is said of me, that I have spent more on wine than oil, as did Demosthenes when it was told him, that his expense on oil was greater than on wine. I truly hold it for an honor and praise to be called and reputed a frolic Gualter and a Robin Goodfellow. For under this name am I welcome in all choice companies of Pantagruelists. It was upbraided to Demosthenes by an envious surly knave, that his orations did smell like the sarpler or wrapper of a foul and filthy oil vessel. For this cause interpret you all my deeds and sayings in the perfectest sense. Reverence the cheese-like brain that feeds you with these fair bilivezes and trifling jollities, and do what lies in you to keep me always merry. Be frolic now, my lads, cheer up your hearts, and joyfully read the rest, with all the ease of your body and profit of your reins. But hearken, jolt heads, you videses or Dickens take ye, remember to drink a health to me for the like favor again, and I will pledge you instantly, tout Aries Medes. Rabelais to the Reader. Good friends, my readers, who peruse this book, be not offended, whilst on it you look, denude yourselves of all depraved affection, for it contains no badness nor infection. 'Tis true that it brings forth to you no birth of any value, but in point of mirth, thinking therefore how sorrow might your mind consume, I could no apter subject find, 1 inch of joy surmounts of grief a span, because to laugh is proper to the man. Chapter 1I. Of the genealogy and antiquity of Gargantua. I must refer you to the great chronicle of Pantagruel for the knowledge of that genealogy and antiquity of race, by which Gargantua is come unto us. In it you may understand more at large how the giants were born in this world, and how from them by a direct line issued Gargantua, the father of Pantagruel. And do not take it ill, if for this time I pass by it, although the subject be such that the oftener it were remembered, the more it would please your worshipful Cinyrias, according to which you have the authority of Plato in Philebo and Gorgias. And of Flaccus, who says that there are some kinds of purposes, such as these are without doubt, which, the frequentlier they be repeated, still prove the more delectable. Would to God everyone had as certain knowledge of his genealogy, since the time of the Ark of Noah until this age. I think many are at this day emperors, kings, dukes, princes, and popes on the earth, whose extraction is from some porters and pardon peddlers. As on the contrary, many are now poor wandering beggars, wretched and miserable, who are descended of the blood and lineage of great kings and emperors, occasioned, as I conceive it, by the transport and revolution of kingdoms and empires, from the Assyrians to the Medes, from the Medes to the Persians, from the Persians to the Macedonians, from the Macedonians to the Romans, from the Romans to the Greeks, from the Greeks to the French. And to give you some hint concerning myself, who speaks unto you, I cannot think but I am come of the race of some rich king or prince in former times. For never yet saw you any man that had a greater desire to be a king, and to be rich than I have, and that only that I may make good cheer, do nothing, nor care for anything, and plentifully enrich my friends, and all honest and learned men. But herein do I comfort myself, that in the other world I shall be so, yea, and greater too than at this present I dare wish. As for you, with the same or a better conceit consolate yourselves in your distresses, and drink fresh if you can come by it. To return to our weathers, I say that by the sovereign gift of heaven, the antiquity and genealogy of Gargantua hath been reserved for our use more full and perfect than any other, except that of the meshes, whereof I mean not to speak. For it belongs not unto my purpose, and the devils, that is to say, the false accusers and dissembled gospellers, will therein oppose me. This genealogy was found by John Andrew in a meadow, which he had near the pole arch, under the olive tree, as you go to Narse, where, as he was making cast up some ditches, the diggers with their mattocks struck against a great brazen tomb, and unmeasurably long, for they could never find the end thereof, by reason that it entered too far within the sluices of Vienne. Opening this tomb in a certain place thereof, sealed on the top with the mark of a goblet, about which was written in Etrurian letters hic by bitter, they found 9 flagons set in such order as they used to rank their kyles in Gascony, of which that which was placed in the middle had under it a big, fat, great, grey, pretty, small, mouldy little pamphlet, smelling stronger, but no better than roses. In that book the said genealogy was found written all at length, in a chancery hand, not in paper, not in parchment, nor in wax, but in the bark of an elm tree, yet so worn with the long tract of time, that hardly could 3 letters together be there perfectly discerned. I, though unworthy, was sent for thither, and with much help of those spectacles, whereby the art of reading dim writings and letters that do not clearly appear to the sight is practiced, as Aristotle teacheth it, did translate the book as you may see in your Pantagruelizing, that is to say, in drinking stiffly to your own heart's desire, and reading the dreadful and horrific acts of Pantagruel. At the end of the book, there was a little treatise entitled The Antidoted Fanfreluches, or a gallimatia of extravagant conceits. The rats and moths, or, that I may not lie, other wicked beasts, had nibbled off the beginning. The rest I have hereto subjoined, for the reverence I bear to antiquity. Chapter 1.2. The Antidoted Fanfreluches, or a gallimatia of extravagant conceits found in an ancient monument. No sooner did the Cimbrians, overcomer, pass through the air to shun the dew of summer, but at his coming straight great tubs were filled, with pure fresh butter down in showers distilled, wherewith when watered was his grandam, hey, aloud he cried, "Fish it, sir, I pray why?" Because his beard is almost all bewrayed, or that he would hold to a scale, he prayed. To lick his slipper, some told was much better, than to gain pardons, and the merit greater. In interim a crafty chuff approaches from the depth issued, where they fish for roaches, who said, "Good sirs, some of them let us save. The eel is here, and in this hollow cave you'll find, if that our looks on it demur, a great waste in the bottom of his fur." To read this chapter when he did begin, nothing but a calf's horns were found therein. "I feel," quoth he, "the mitre which doth hold my head so chill, it makes my brains take cold." Being with the perfume of a turnip warmed, to stay by chimney hearths himself, he armed, provided that a new thill horse they made of every person of a hair-brained head. They talked of the bunghole of St. Noel's, of Gilbathar and thousand other holes, if they might be reduced tea, a scary stuff, such as might not be subject to the cough, since every man unseemly did it find, to see them gaping thus at every wind, for, if perhaps they handsomely were closed, for pledges they to men might be exposed. In this arrest by Hercules the raven was flayed at her, his return from Libya haven. "Why am not I," said Minos, "there invited? Unless it be myself, not one's omitted, and then it is their mind, I do no more of frogs and oysters send them any store. In case they spare my life and prove but civil, I give their sale of distaffs to the devil. To quell him comes QB, who limping frets at the safe pass of tricksy crackerets. The bolter, the grand Cyclops, cousin, those did massacre, whilst each one wiped his nose. Few ingles in this fallow ground are bred, but on a tanner's mill are winnowed. Run thither all of you, alarms sound clear, you shall have more than you had the last year." Short while thereafter was the bird of Jove resolved to speak, though dismal it should prove, yet was afraid, when he saw them in ire, they should o'erthrow quite flat down dead empire. He rather choose the fire from heaven to steal, to boats where were red herrings put to sail, than to be calm gainst those who strive to brave us, and to the massorets fond words enslave us. All this at last concluded gallantly, in spite of Ate and her hern-like thigh, who, sitting, saw Penthesilea tan, in her old age, for a cress-selling queen. Each one cried out, "Thou filthy collier toad, doth it become thee to be found abroad? Thou hast the Roman standard filched away, which they in rags of parchment did display." Juno was born, who, under the rainbow, was a bird catching with her duck below, when her with such a grievous trick they plied that she had almost been bethwacked by it. The bargain was, that, of that throatful, she should of Proserpina have 2 eggs free, and if that she thereafter should be found, she to a hawthorn hill should be fast bound. 7 months thereafter, lacking 22, he, that of old did Carthage town undo, did bravely midst them all himself advance, requiring of them his inheritance, although they justly made up the division, according to the Shoe-Welt law's decision, by distributing store of brews and beef to these poor fellows that did pen the brief. But year will come, sign of a Turkish bow, 5 spindles yarned, and 3 pot bottoms too, wherein of a discourteous king the dock shall peppered be under an hermit's frock. That for one she hypocrite you must permit so many acres to be lost. Cease, this vizard may become another, withdraw yourselves unto the serpent's brother. 'Tis in times past, that he who is shall reign with his good friends in peace now and again. No rash nor heady prince shall then rule crave, Each good will its arbitrament shall have, and the joy, promised of old as doom to the heavens' guests, shall in its beacon come. Then shall the breeding mares, that benumbed were, like royal palfreys ride triumphant there. And this continue shall from time to time, till Mars be fettered for an unknown crime. Then shall one come, who others will surpass, delightful, pleasing, matchless, full of grace. Cheer up your hearts, approach to this repast, all trusty friends of mine, for he's deceased, who would not for a world return again, so highly shall time past be cried up then. He who was made of wax shall lodge each member close by the hinges of a block of timber. Within no more shall master, woot, the swagger, who alarum bell holds out. Could one seize on the dagger which he bears, heads would be free from tingling in the ears to baffle the whole storehouse of abuses. The thus farewell Apollo and the Muses. Chapter 1.3. How Gargantua was carried 11 months in his mother's belly. Grangousier was a good fellow in his time, and notable jester. He loved to drink neat, as much as any man that then was in the world, and would willingly eat salt meat. To this intent he was ordinarily well furnished with gammons of bacon, both of Westphalia, Mayence and Bayonne, with store of dried neat's tongues, plenty of links, chitlins and puddings in their season. Together with salt beef and mustard, a good deal of hard roes of powdered mullet called batargos, great provision of sausages, not of Bologna, for he feared the Lombard bacon, but of Bigorra, Longolnay, Breen, and Rouag. In the vigor of his age he married Gargamel, daughter to the king of the Parpillans, a jolly pug and well-mouthed wench. These two did oftentimes do the two-backed beast together, joyfully rubbing and fraughting their bacon, gainst one another, in so far that at last she became great with child of a fair son, and went with him unto the 11th month. For so long, yea longer, may a woman carry her great belly, especially when it is some masterpiece of nature, and a person predestinated to the performance, in his due time, of great exploits. As Homer says, that the child, which Neptune begot upon the nymph, was born a whole year after the conception, that is, in the 12th month. For as Aulus Gellius saith lib. 3, this long time was suitable to the majesty of Neptune, that in it the child might receive his perfect form. For the like reason Jupiter made the night, wherein he lay with Alcmena, last 48 hours, a shorter time not being sufficient for the forging of Hercules, who cleansed the world of the monsters and tyrants wherewith it was suppressed. My masters, the ancient Pantagruelists, have confirmed that which I say, and withal declared it to be not only possible, but also maintained the lawful birth and legitimation of the infant born of a woman in the 11th month after the decease of her husband. Hippocrates lib. Duelimento. Plinius lib. 7 cap. 5. Plautus in his Systoleria. Marcus Varro, in his satire, inscribed the Testament, alleging to this purpose the authority of Aristotle. Censorinus lib. De Dinatali. Arist. Lib. 7 cap. 3 and 4, De Natura Animalium. Gellius lib. 3 cap. 16. Servius, in his exposition upon this verse of Virgil's Eclogues, Matri longa decem, and c, and 1,000 other fools, whose number hath been increased by the lawyers ff. De sues et legit L. Intestato. Paragrapho. Fin. And in os. De restidat. Et equiparat insimens. Moreover, upon these grounds, they have foisted in their Rabida Lardic, or Lapiturative law. Gallus ff. De lib. Et post. L. Sept. Ff. De stat. Home and some other laws, which at this time I dare not name, by means whereof the honest widows may without danger play at the close buttock game with might and main, and as hard as they can, for the space of the first 2 months after the decease of their husbands. I pray you, my good lusty springle lads, if you find any of these females that are worth the pains of untying the codpiece point, get up, ride upon them, and bring them to me. For, if they happen within the 3rd month to conceive, the child should be heir to the deceased if, before he died, he had no other children, and the mother shall pass for an honest woman. When she is known to have conceived, thrust forward boldly, spare her not, whatever betide you, seeing the paunch is full. as Julia, the daughter of the Emperor Octavian, never prostituted herself to her belly bumpers, but when she found herself with child, after the manner of ships, that receive not their steersmen till they have their ballast and lading. And if any blame them for this their radiconniculation, and reiterated lechery upon their pregnancy and big-belledness, seeing beasts in the like exigent of their fullness will never suffer the male masculine to encroach them, their answer will be that those are beasts, but they are women, very well skilled in the pretty veils and small fees of the pleasant trade and mysteries of superfetation. As Populia heretofore answered, according to the relation of Macrobius, lib. 2. Saturnal. If the devil will not have them to bag, he must ring hard the spigot and stop the bunghole. Chapter 1.4. How Gargamel, being great with Gargantua, did eat a huge deal of tripes. The occasion and manner how Gargamel was brought to bed and delivered of her child was thus, and, if you do not believe it, I wish your bumgut fall out and make an escapade. Her bumgut, indeed, or fundament escaped her in an afternoon, on the 3rd day of February, with having eaten at dinner too many goadbillios. Goadbillios are the fat tripes of quarros. Quarros are beeves fattened at the cratch in ox stalls, or in the fresh gimmo meadows. Gimmo meadows are those that, for their fruitfulness, may be mowed twice a year. Of those fat beeves they had killed 367,014, to be salted at Shrovetide, that in the entering of the spring they might have plenty of powdered beef, wherewith to season their mouths at the beginning of their meals, and to taste their wine the better. They had abundance of tripes, as you have heard, and they were so delicious that everyone licked his fingers. But the mischief was this, that, for all men could do, there was no possibility to keep them long in that relish, for in a very short while they would have stunk, which had been an undecent thing. It was therefore concluded that they should be all of them gulched up, without losing anything. To this effect they invited all the burghers of Senais, of Sewil, of the Rochclermaud, of Vaugaudry, without omitting the Coudray, Montpensier, the David, and other their neighbours, all stiff drinkers, brave fellows, and good players at the Kyles. The good man Grangasier took great pleasure in their company, and commanded there should be no want nor pinching for anything. Nevertheless, he bade his wife eat sparingly, because she was near her time, and that these tripes were no very commendable meat. They would fain, said he, be at the chewing of ordure, that would eat the case wherein it was. Notwithstanding these admonitions, she did eat 16 quarters, 2 bushels, 3 pecks, and a pipkin full. Oh, the fair fecality wherewith she swelled, by the ingrediency of such shit and stuff. After dinner they all went out in a hurl to the grove of the willows, where, on the green grass, to the sound of the merry flutes and pleasant bagpipes, they danced so gallantly, that it was a sweet and heavenly sport to see them so frolic. Chapter 1.5. The discourse of the drinkers. Then did they fall upon the chat of victuals and some belly furniture, to be snatched at in the very same place. Which purpose was no sooner mentioned, but forthwith began flagons to go, gammons to trot, goblets to fly, great bowls to ting, glasses to ring. Draw, reach, fill, mix, give it me without water. So, my friend, so, whip me off this glass neatly, bring me hither some claret, a full weeping glass till it run over. A cessation and truce with thirst. Ha, thou false fever, wilt thou not be gone? By my figgins, godmother, I cannot as yet enter in the humour of being merry, nor drink so currently as I would. You have catched a cold, gammer. Yea, forsooth, sir. By the belly of Sanct Buff, let us talk of our drink. I never drink but at my hours, like the Pope's mule. And I never drink but in my breviary, like a fair father guardian. Which was first, thirst or drinking? Thirst, for who in the time of innocence would have drunk without being athirst? Nay, sir, it was drinking, for privatio praesupponat habitum. I am learned, you see, focundi calix quem non facere desertum. We poor innocents drink, but too much without thirst. Not I truly, who am a sinner, for I never drink without thirst, either present or future. To prevent it, as you know, I drink for the thirst to come. I drink eternally. This is to me an eternity of drinking, and drinking of eternity. Let us sing, let us drink, and tune up our roundelays. Where's my funnel? What, it seems, I do not drink, but by an attorney. Do you wet yourselves to dry, or do you dry to wet you? Pish, I understand not the theoric, I should say, but I help myself somewhat by the practice. Based. Enough. I sup, I wet, I humect, I moisten my gullet, I drink, and all for fear of dying. Drink always, and you shall never die. If I drink not, I am aground, dry, gravelled, and spent. I am stark dead without drink, and my soul ready to fly into some marsh amongst frogs. The soul never dwells in a dry place, drouth kills it. O you butlers, creators of new forms, make me of no drinker a drinker, a perennity and everlastingness of sprinkling, and bedewing me through these my parched and sinewy bowels. He drinks in vain, that feels not the pleasure of it. This entereth into my veins the pissing tools, and urinal vessels shall have nothing of it. I would willingly wash the tripes of the calf, which I apparelled this morning. I have pretty well now ballasted my stomach, and stuffed my paunch. If the papers of my bonds and bills could drink as well as I do, my creditors would not want for wine when they come to see me, or when they are to make any formal exhibition of their rights, to what of me they can demand. This hand of yours spoils your nose. Oh, how many other such will enter here before this go out? What drink so shallow? It is enough to break both girds and petrol. This is called a cup of dissimulation, or flagonal hypocrisy. What difference is there between a bottle and a flagon? Great difference, for the bottle is stopped and shut up with a stopple, but the flagon with a vice, la beauté est fermée à bouchon, et le flacon à vis. Bravely and well played upon the words. Our fathers drank lustily, and emptied their cans. Well cacked, well sung. Come, let us drink, will you send nothing to the river? Here is one going to wash the tripes. I drink no more than a sponge. I drink like a Templar knight. And I tanquam sponsus. And I sicut terra sine aqua. Give me a synonym for a gammon of bacon. It is the compulsory of drinkers, it is a pulley. By a pulley rope wine is let down into a cellar, and by a gammon into the stomach. Hey! Now boys, hither some drink, some drink. There is no trouble in it. Respice personam, pone pro duos, bus non est in usu. If I could get up as well as I can swallow down, I had been long ere now very high in the air. Thus became Tom Tosspot rich thus, when in the tailor's stitch. Thus did Bacchus conquer into thus philosophy meloned. A little rain allays a great deal of wind, long tippling breaks the thunder. But if there came such liquor from my ballock, would you not willingly thereafter suck the udder whence it issued? Here, page Phil. I prithee, forget me not when it comes to my turn, and I will enter the election I have made of thee into the very register of my heart. Sup gillat and spare not, there is somewhat in the pot. I appeal from thirst, and disclaim its jurisdiction. Page, sue out my appeal in form. This remnant in the bottom of the glass must follow its leader. I was wont heretofore to drink out all, but now I leave nothing. Let us not make too much haste, it is requisite we carry all along with us. Heyday, here are tripes fit for our sport, and in earnest, excellent goad bilios of the dun ox, you know, with the black streak. Oh, for God's sake, let us lash them soundly, yet thriftily. Drink, or I will know no drink, I beseech you, O G-vus pry. Sparrows will not eat unless you bob them on the tail, nor can I drink if I be not fairly spoke to. The concavities of my body are like another hell for their capacity. Laganididura, lagan lateris cavitas, aids orcus, and ateros alter. There is not a corner, nor coney burrow in all my body, where this wine doth not ferret out my thirst. Ho, this will bang it soundly. But this shall banish it utterly. Let us wind our horns by the sound of flagons and bottles, and cry aloud, that whoever hath lost his thirst come not hither to seek it. Long clysters of drinking are to be voided without doors. The great God made the planets, and we make the platters neat. I have the word of the gospel in my mouth, sitio. The stone called asbestos is not more unquenchable than the thirst of my paternity. Appetite comes with eating, says Anne Justin, but the thirst goes away with drinking. I have a remedy against thirst, quite contrary to that which is good against the biting of a mad dog. Keep running after a dog, and he will never bite you. Drink always before the thirst, and it will never come upon you. There I catch you, I awake you. Argus had 100 eyes for his sight. A butler should have, like Briareus, 100 hands wherewith to fill us wine indefatigably. Hey now, lads, let us moisten ourselves, it will be time to dry hereafter. White wine here, wine boys. Pour out all in the name of Lucifer, fill here, you fill and fill, peace gods on you till it be full. My tongue peels. Lands trink, to thee, countryman, I drink to thee, good fellow, comrade to thee, lusty, lively. Ha la la, that was drunk to some purpose, and bravely gulped over. O lacrima Christi, it is of the best grape. I faith pure Greek. Oh, the fine white wine. Upon my conscience, it is a kind of taffeta's wine hin. It is of one ear, well wrought, and of good wool. Courage, comrade, up thy heart, Billy. We will not be beasted at this bout, for I have got one trick. Ex hoc in hoc. There is no enchantment nor charm there, every one of you hath seen it. My apprenticeship is out, I am a free man at this trade. I am prester mast, prester mace, maester pass, prish brum. I should say master past. Oh, the drinkers, those that are adry, oh, poor thirsty souls. Good page, my friend, fill me here some, and crown the wine, I pray thee. Like a cardinal. Natura abhorret vacuum. Would you say that a fly could drink in this? This is after the fashion of Switzerland. Clear off neat, supernaculum. Come therefore, blades, to this divine liquor and celestial juice, swill it over heartily, and spare not. It is a decoction of nectar and ambrosia. Chapter 1.6. How Gargantua was born in a strange manner. Whilst they were on this discourse, and pleasant tattle of drinking, Gargamel began to be a little unwell in her lower parts. Whereupon Grangousier arose from off the grass, and fell to comfort her very honestly and kindly, suspecting that she was in travail, and told her that it was best for her to sit down upon the grass under the willows, because she was like very shortly to see young feet, and that therefore it was convenient she should pluck up her spirits, and take a good heart of new at the fresh arrival of her baby. Saying to her withal, that although the pain was somewhat grievous to her, it would be but of short continuance, and that the succeeding joy would quickly remove that sorrow, in such sort that she should not so much as remember it. On with a sheep's courage. Quoth he, dispatch this boy, and we will speedily fall to work for the making of another. Huh? Said she, so well as you speak at your own ease, you that are men. Well then, in the name of God, I'll do my best, seeing that you will have it so, but would to God that it were cut off from you. What? Said Grangousier. Ha, said she, you are a good man indeed, you understand it well enough. What, my member? Said he. By the goat's blood, if it please you, that shall be done instantly. Cause bring hither a knife. Alas, said she, the Lord forbid, and pray Jesus to forgive me. I did not say it from my heart, therefore let it alone, and do not do it neither more nor less any kind of harm for my speaking so to you. But I am like to have work enough to do today, and all for your member, yet God bless you and it. Courage, courage, said he, take you no care of the matter, let the 4 foremost oxen do the work. I will yet go drink one whiff more, and if in the meantime anything befall you that may require my presence, I will be so near to you, that, at the first whistling in your fist, I shall be with you forthwith. A little while after she began to groan, lament, and cry. Then suddenly came the midwives from all quarters, who groping her below found some pelluteries, which was a certain filthy stuff, and of a taste truly bad enough. This they thought had been the child, but it was her fundament, that was slipped out with the mollification of her straight entrail, which you call the bum gut, and that merely by eating of too many tripes, as we have showed you before. Whereupon an old ugly trot in the company, who had the repute of an expert she-physician, and was come from Briceville, near to St. Genu, 80 years before, made her so horrible a restrictive and binding medicine, and whereby all her laris, arse-pipes, and conduits were so oppilated, stopped, obstructed, and contracted, that you could hardly have opened and enlarged them with your teeth, which is a terrible thing to think upon. Seeing the devil at the Mass at St. Martin's was puzzled with the like task, when with his teeth he had lengthened out the parchment, whereon he wrote the tittle-tattle of 2 young mangy whores. By this inconvenient, the cotyledons of her matrix were presently loosed, through which the child sprang up and leaped, and so, entering into the hollow vein, did climb by the diaphragm even above her shoulders, where the vein divides itself into 2, and from thence taking his way towards the left side, issued forth at her left ear. As soon as he was born, he cried not as other babes used to do, mees, 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 but with a high, sturdy, and big voice shouted about, some drink, some drink, some drink, as inviting all the world to drink with him. The noise hereof was so extremely great that it was heard in both the countries, at once of Beauce and by Berrois. I doubt me that you do not thoroughly believe the truth of this strange nativity. Though you believe it not, I care not much. But an honest man and of good judgment believeth still what is told him, and that which he finds written. Is this beyond our law, or our faith against reason, or the Holy Scripture? For my part, I find nothing in the sacred Bible that is against it. But tell me, if it had been the will of God, would you say that he could not do it? Ha, for favour's sake, I beseech you, never emberlucock or impelregifies your spirits with these vain thoughts and idle conceits. For I tell you, it is not impossible with God, and, if he pleased, all women henceforth should bring forth their children at the ear. Was not Bacchus engendered out of the very thigh of Jupiter? Did not Roquetelade come out at his mother's heel, and Croquemauche from the slipper of his nurse? Was not Minerva born of the brain, even through the ear of Jove? Adonis of the bark of a myrrh tree, and Castor and Pollux of the dupe of that egg which was laid and hatched by Leda. But you would wonder more, and with far greater amazement, if I should now present you with that chapter of Plinius, wherein he treateth of strange births and contrary to nature, and yet am not I so impudent a liar as he was. Read the 7th book of his Natural History, chapter 3, and trouble not my head any more about this. Chapter 1.7. After what manner Gargantua had his name given him, and how he tippled, bibbed, and curried the can. The good man Grangousier, drinking and making merry with the rest, heard the horrible noise which his son had made as he entered into the light of this world, when he cried out, some drink, some drink, some drink, whereupon he said in French, Quoi grand tu as et souple le gausier? That is to say, how great and nimble a throat thou hast. Which the company hearing, said that verily the child ought to be called Gargantua, because it was the first word that after his birth his father had spoke, in imitation, and at the example of the ancient Hebrews. Whereunto he condescended, and his mother was very well pleased therewith. In the meanwhile, to quiet the child, they gave him to drink a tirelerget, that is, till his throat was like to crack with it. Then was he carried to the font, and there baptized, according to the manner of good Christians. Immediately thereafter were appointed for him 17,913 cows of the towns of Pottle and Brehemond, to furnish him with milk in ordinary. For it was impossible to find a nurse sufficient for him in all the country, considering the great quantity of milk that was requisite for his nourishment. Although there were not wanting some doctors of the opinion of Scotus, who affirmed that his own mother gave him suck, and that she could draw out of her breasts 1,402 pipes and 9 pails of milk at every time. Which indeed is not probable, and this point hath been found duggishly scandalous and offensive to tender ears, for that it savoured a little of heresy. Thus was he handled for 1 year and 10 months. After which time, by the advice of physicians, they began to carry him, and then was made for him a fine little cart drawn with oxen, of the invention of Jan Denio, wherein they led him hither and thither with great joy. And he was worth the seeing, for he was a fine boy, had a burly physiognomy, and almost 10 chins. He cried very little, but beshit himself every hour. For, to speak truly of him, he was wonderfully phlegmatic in his posteriors, both by reason of his natural complexion and the accidental disposition which had befallen him by his too much quaffing of the septembral juice. Yet without a cause did not he sup 1 drop. For if he happened to be vexed, angry, displeased, or sorry, if he did fret, if he did weep, if he did cry, and what grievous quarter soever he kept, in bringing him some drink, he would be instantly pacified, reseated in his own temper, in a good humour again, and as still and quiet as ever. One of his governesses told me, swearing by her fig, how he was so accustomed to this kind of way, that, at the sound of pints and flagons, he would on a sudden fall into an ecstasy, as if he had then tasted of the joys of paradise. So that they, upon consideration of this, his divine complexion would every morning, to cheer him up, play with a knife upon the glasses, on the bottles with their stopples, and on the pottle pots with their lids and covers, at the sound whereof he became gay, did leap for joy, would loll and rock himself in the cradle, then nod with his head, monochordizing with his fingers, and baritonizing with his tail.